I really think that wind is the most promising energy resource that we have that we can really tap in the near future, and I'd like to describe to you how that can come about. We've actually been using the wind since colonial times for a variety of purposes, and in the late 19th century, hundreds of thousands of water pumping windmills like this were used to open up vast stretches of farmland and ranch land across the Midwest and the West. Sometimes the winds can be a menace, but the winds, in fact, in this country are superabundant, and this map will show you the red and purple areas as the wind belt, as it's often called, stretching from the Dakotas on down through Texas. But beyond that very rich area, we have superabundant wind resources across much of the nation, so much so that it's been estimated we could be getting 10 times our current total electric power supply from wind, from on-land sources. If you add in offshore wind, that multiplier goes to about 14 times our total electricity supply. So a really considerable resource for us to be tapping in the future. Well, what's the situation today? Today, we get about 4% of our total power supply nationwide from wind. That may not sound very impressive. It amounts to about 13 million households' total electricity needs. But there are a number of states that are way ahead of the curve. South Dakota gets about 22% of its electricity from wind. Iowa gets about 20%. And even big oil Texas, the largest power-consuming state in the Union, gets about 7% of its electricity from wind. So we're already on our way to a wind energy future. Well, when we think about going forward, how quickly could we get to that next wave that Jim Moody was talking about, to the next period where wind power really becomes a major contributor to our power supply? The Department of Energy in 2008, interestingly under George Bush's administration, not exactly an energy visionary, came out with a study called Wind Powering America, 20% by 2030. And that study projected that by 2030, 2 decades from now, we could be getting 1/5 of our total power needs from wind. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory came out with a study in June, and it estimated that by the middle of this century, wind and solar alone could be providing 1/2 of our total power needs using technology that is commercially available today. In addition to being an abundant provider of electricity, wind power creates jobs. Lots of them today, lots more in the future. We have about 75,000 Americans employed in the wind industry today, many of them in manufacturing. And I'm sure many of you have heard about the Chinese eating our proverbial lunch when it comes to renewable energy. The reality is with wind that 2/3 of the value of the typical turbine that is put up on American soil is American made. So we're looking at and that's double what it was 5 years ago. So we're looking at a technology that is becoming increasingly an American-made technology, creating American jobs in manufacturing, but also in the construction of wind farms and in the ongoing operation of wind farms. Over 250,000 jobs will be generated by the time we approach that 2030 goal of getting 1/5 of our electric power from wind. My book, Harvest the Wind, has as its subtitle, America's Journey to Jobs, Energy Independence, and Climate Stability. But the journey that I took is really a more personal one in many ways. From my native New England, where, as Jim mentioned, there's been a long-standing battle over the Cape Wind offshore wind farm. It started in 2001, and it's still raging today because of a multi-million-dollar opposition campaign. I was frustrated and frankly ashamed at how hard it's been for us to move wind power forward in New England on a scale that can make a difference, offshore and onshore. So I wanted to go to parts of the country where wind power is not being battled, but is actually being embraced. One of those areas is Cloud County, Kansas. Cloud County, Kansas was first settled in the late 1800s when the Kansas Pacific Railroad first rolled through. Its population peaked in 1910, and it's been in decline ever since. So much so that one local commentator said not so long ago, it used to be that if you wanted to commit suicide, all you had to do was lie down in the middle of Main Street on a Saturday afternoon. The problem was you wouldn't die until Monday because there were so few cars. The person who said that was Kirk Lowell. Kirk Lowell is the head of something called Cloud Corp, the Cloud County Economic Development Agency, and he is an avid wind booster. He doesn't talk about climate change, nor did many of the people I spoke with across much of America. He does talk about American energy independence. And he thinks about it in terms of the many young Kansas people who have gone off to fight foreign wars in the Middle East, largely over our dependence upon foreign oil, in his view. He puts it pithily in saying, either we're going to have to put more wind turbines on our Kansas prairie, or we're going to have to continue to bury more and more of our fine young men and women under the prairie. Kirk was instrumental in the siting and development of the Meridian Way wind farm in Cloud County. This wind farm, with its 67 turbines, generates enough electricity for about 55,000 Kansas and Missouri households. It also created hundreds of jobs in the construction of the wind farm and dozens of additional jobs in the ongoing operation and maintenance of the wind farm. But one of the most remarkable things that happened in Cloud County took place at Cloud County Community College. In 2007, the college made a strategic bet. It decided to create a wind technology training program, getting in on the ground floor of this promising new technology. At the time, and they hired Bruce Graham, a high school science teacher, to run the program. At the time, there were about 5 students who were interested in the program. So the county went out and looked for available real estate. They found some classroom space sandwiched between a Chinese restaurant and a pawn shop in the local shopping mall. And that's where Bruce Graham set up his program. Today, Bruce has over 100 students enrolled in his program. And as you can see from this photograph, not all of them are kids fresh off the farm. There are Army veterans, there are former school teachers, office administrators, people coming out of the construction trades, all looking to get in on the ground floor of this exciting new technology. Farmers and ranchers are also major beneficiaries of wind power. People like Kirk Core and his mother, Helen. Being in Chicago, I have to say that this photograph is my homage to Grant Wood's American Gothic. The Cores have lived in Cloud County for 4 generations, and they are now getting, from the 9 wind turbines on their property, tens of thousands of dollars in guaranteed lease payments from the wind developer. Those payments are independent of the ups and downs in grain and cattle prices. They're not affected by the ups and downs and the craziness of Midwestern weather, as we've seen amply this past summer. And Kurt very much hopes that one of his 2 sons will come back to live on the family farm, enticed in part by the security that that guaranteed income from the wind farm for decades to come will provide. Wind power's story is not entirely a rosy one. There is no such thing as a free lunch when it comes to producing electricity or producing energy. One of the things that gave wind power a rather bad name was the way it really started out as a power producer in the 1980s. Wind farms were put up in a very slapdash manner, largely in California. They looked a lot like this. Turbines spaced very, very closely to one another. The blades, although you can't see it from this photograph, spinning very quickly and close to the ground, and they ended up killing a lot of birds. In addition, wind farms have generated noise, and that is a concern. But today's wind farm are a very different story. The turbines are much more generously spaced across the landscape, hundreds of feet apart from one another. They stand much taller, and their blades spin much more slowly, so birds can see them and have a much easier time avoiding them. That isn't to say that there aren't issues with ongoing bird protection pertaining to the wind industry. There are. Localities, as well as wind developers, as well as state government entities, are getting a lot smarter about anticipating the problems with wind power, noise again being one of them, and designing the placement of these turbines such that they end up protecting the natural resources around them and creating happy as opposed to disgruntled neighbors. When we think about wind power, we can't think about it as, well, wind power or nothing. We have to think about it in terms of what wind power lets us displace. And one of the things that wind power lets us displace is dirty coal. We get our coal from mines like this, open pit mines in the west, or mountaintop removal mines in the east, devastating to the environment, to ecology, and beyond what the coal mines themselves produce by way of environmental harm, the combustion of coal to produce power is, as all of you know, devastating. The health impacts are notorious, and the amount of greenhouse gas emissions spewed by these power plants is absolutely staggering and really jeopardizes the global climate that our children and our grandchildren will inherit. Along with coal, nuclear is another technology that we can begin to phase out as we phase in wind power. We have an aging, large fleet of nuclear power plants that we're in a very big rush right now to relicense. And those plants have significant hazards in terms of their ongoing operation, as we've seen all too painfully from the Fukushima disaster most recently. And we still have no means of disposing of nuclear waste. So this is a technology fraught with serious problems. Wind power may not be a panacea, but it offers us a great alternative to some of the technologies that we are so dependent upon today. It is a renewable technology, a relatively clean technology, depending upon a superabundant resource. The technology itself is in hand today. What we really need is the political will to move it forward. Thank you very much.